In Spanish, you say a pesar de, but when you translate into English, suddenly things get messy. Is it despite of, in spite of? In this video, I'm going to break it down so you never hesitate again. Then I encourage you to click the link in the description. There you will find a worksheet which will allow you to get better with the structure. Hi, I'm Jack from Crystal Clear English, and today I'm going to be breaking down despite and in spite of. Now, you might think that despite and in spite of are complicated, but they're really not. Now, the first thing to say is that you have two options. You have despite and you have in spite of. Now, this sounds very simple. However, a lot of people make a mistake at this point. They will say things like despite of or in despite of. Remember, there are only two options here. So I would, if I were you, choose your favorite. Remember, you can choose despite or you can choose in spite of. Now you might ask which one's more common. Well, if you look at the Google Ngram viewer here, you will actually see that despite is the more common of the two words. So if you had to choose one, perhaps that's the best one to choose. Historically, in spite of was more common, but nowadays despite is more common. So if you want to use the most modern option, perhaps go for despite. Now that you've chosen your favorite, despite or in spite of, let us continue. Now what I'm going to tell you now is actually a little bit counterintuitive. The longer structure is actually the easier to use. What we're going to do now is we're going to add the fact that to both of these expressions. So you can say despite the fact that, or you can also say in spite of the fact that. Why is this easy? Because this structure allows for a normal sentence to be said afterwards. So you could say sentences such as the following. Despite the fact that we missed the deadline, the client approved the project. Or despite the fact that the data was incomplete, they proceeded with the analysis. In spite of the fact that the team had limited resources, they delivered strong results. The important thing to remember here is that this structure avoids a lot of grammar mistakes. So in Spanish, a pesar de que, in English, despite the fact that, or in spite of the fact that. Now the shorter option is more difficult to use. Let me explain why. If you just say despite or in spite of, then you have got two options. Let's look at them both. Firstly, you can use a noun. Now if you use a noun, you would just say, for example, despite the delay. Despite the pressure, she remained very calm. The other option you have here is a gerund. Now remember, a gerund is the noun form of the verb. It is essentially the form of the verb that ends in ing. Smoking, for example. So if we take a verb like know, the gerund would be knowing. It's easy to do. All you do is add ing. Now if you want to use this in the negative, all you have to do is add not. For example, knowing, not knowing. Despite not knowing the answer, she gave a confident presentation. Despite working all weekend, we couldn't finish the report. In spite of not having enough data, they made a decision. So remember, in Spanish you got a pesar de. You really got two options, despite or in spite of. The easiest option is always adding the fact that. So by saying despite the fact that, you can just continue with the sentence. Despite the fact that he didn't come to the meeting, there wasn't a problem. If we try and do this with the noun or gerund, it becomes a little bit more difficult. For example, the noun, despite his absence, there wasn't a problem. Or despite not coming, there wasn't a problem. You can see that of all these three options, adding just the fact that is by far the easiest. So this is what I encourage my students to learn. So to summarize, you've got two options. Choose your favorite, despite or in spite of. The most common is despite, and the easiest structure to use is simply adding the fact that. And if this video has been useful for you, then I encourage you to click the link in the description. There you will find a worksheet which will allow you to get better with the structure. I hope this video helped, and I'll see you in the next one.